Hello and welcome to the Birds in Winter series. My name is Jen Bulava, and I'm the lead naturalist for the Burlington County Park System. In this series, we looked at some of the bird species and behaviors that can be observed in the winter months here in New Jersey. I thought it would be appropriate to conclude the series with how our birds must adapt to changing conditions brought about by humans. The timing of annual cycles of plants and insects is shifting with climate change. Warmer temperatures mean that plants will emerge and flower earlier, and also insects will develop earlier. The birds time their egg laying to correspond to the peak of prey abundance to ensure that their chicks have enough food to survive. The vast majority of birds rely on insects and other invertebrates to feed their young. But if the insects are emerging earlier, that means the birds will need to nest earlier in order to be in sync. Our resident birds can sense changes in local conditions and hopefully adjust accordingly. But with migratory birds, it's obviously much more complicated. It means that they'll have to depart from their wintering grounds ahead of time. Since the normal trigger for them to leave is controlled mainly by day length, that's really difficult for a migratory bird to assess when to depart. Recent studies published between 2017 and 2019 of nest timing found that many species have shifted to earlier nesting as the climate has warmed. While birds have adjusted their arrival times in response, many species are not adjusting fast enough. Many species have also been shifting their ranges northward as well. In the first part of the series, we talked about how birds' diets in winter can shift from eating insects and invertebrates to berries in the winter. And one good example of that is the robins and the bluebirds. Robins used to be a sign of spring here in New Jersey, but we can see them now throughout the year, including the winter, and that's a result of food availability. So robins now winter farther north, partly due to warmer conditions and more abundant fruit. The fruit is from some of our native shrubs and trees, as well as invasive vines like Asiatic bittersweet, which they have taken advantage of. Many of our very common backyard birds, like the red-bellied woodpecker, the tufted titmouse, cardinal, mockingbird, and Carolina wren, have all colonized New England from the south within just the last 100 years, all shifting their range northward. Why is this? In addition to overall warmer climatic conditions and an abundance of fruit, the suburban microclimate is another factor. So, closely spaced houses and hedges create warmer microclimates for some of these birds to adapt. And even the dense cover in the form of some of the planted shrubs and trees, which may not even be native, still provides shelter. And of course, there's lots of bird feeders now. So all of these factors are allowing these birds to expand their range north. Of course, there are many other threats to birds besides climate change. Habitat loss is the most obvious and greatest threat to birds due to development of land and conversion of land to agriculture. Remember that migratory birds require suitable habitat for breeding grounds, wintering grounds, and stopover sites in between. Collisions with man-made objects certainly take place, often during migration. Poisoning of birds can happen directly by ingesting chemicals or indirectly by consuming contaminated prey or bathing in or drinking contaminated water. Lead poisoning occurs from lead bullets or lead sinkers in the food that birds eat, or from eating old paint. If poisons to kill rodents are used, they may be eaten by mice and rats and then consumed by birds of prey. Weed killers and insecticides can be lethal to songbirds, both directly and indirectly. Seeds that are coated in pesticides, such as neonicotinoids, can kill birds outright that eat the seeds. Recent research and statistics only take into account birds that inhabit farms and only birds that are killed directly, not indirectly, by pesticides. So most bird deaths go unreported, and the full extent of bird fatalities due to pesticide poisoning, therefore, is very difficult to determine. Some pesticides accumulate and are stored in fatty tissues of animals, resulting in the highest amounts accumulating at the top of the food chain, which was the case with many birds of prey in DDT. Some poisoning results in non-lethal but debilitating conditions, such as eggshell thinning, slower growth rates, reduced territorial defense, lethargic behavior, weight loss, suppressed immune systems, disruption of hormones, and inability to properly navigate during migration. Migratory birds are potentially exposed to more pesticides than resident birds, as they encounter many different regions that in many cases have little to no pesticide regulation. Reducing insect prey as a whole has an indirect negative effect on birds as well. But one of the largest human-caused sources of bird mortality are outdoor cats, resulting in 2.4 billion losses of birds per year. That information is courtesy of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service 2017 data. Imagine surviving all these threats as a migratory bird, landing in someone's yard, only to be killed by a house cat that's well fed but instinctively programmed to hunt prey. These are losses that easily are preventable by keeping cats indoors. The good news is that everyone can help protect birds, whether it's taking actions around your home or taking actions that reduce resource consumption. Every action is a step towards protecting birds for future generations. The following slides are examples of all different ways you can help. One way is to help birds by putting up bird feeders. Now, there are some important tips to remember. It's a good idea not to hang a bird feeder in a tree where all kinds of other animals can get to it, like squirrels, raccoons, and so forth. And it's a good idea to avoid seed that has a lot of millet, because millet attracts nuisance pest birds like starlings and house sparrows, which are not native. It's a good idea to have shrubs so that birds can escape to shelter nearby. And these are some other tips that you may find helpful. It's always nice to provide suet, especially in the winter, for birds that don't eat seed or get most of their diet from protein and fat. Now, this doesn't apply to the winter time, but when we have hummingbirds visiting us in the warmer months, you can also put out hummingbird feeders, and bright colors are best to attract them. It's a 1 to 4, 1 part sugar to 4 parts water in the mix. You definitely don't need any kind of red dye in the water. Just make sure that it's cleaned regularly, because it does go bad and it can make the hummingbird sick. The best way to remember when to put up and take down feeders for hummingbirds is generally April 15th to October, so tax day to Columbus Day is a good way to remember. And of course, just like with the birds that eat seed, they supplement their diet with all kinds of other nutrients from the forest. And hummingbirds supplement their diet, of course, with flower nectar. That's their source. So it's a good idea to have flowers that they can feed on instead of just sugar water. And these are some examples of trumpet, honeysuckle, and bee balm, and cardinal flower. You can also put up bird houses for birds to nest in. It's a good idea to find one that for the holes have reinforced metal around to deter predators. There's a lot of different birds that will use these, and you can research which size hole is best for the birds you want to attract. It's a good idea for the roof to extend over the hole, and definitely don't want pressure treated wood, which is contaminant for birds. And no perches on the outside, because that allows, again, predators to grab hold and get inside. Birds don't need that. And look for ones that can be opened from underneath or in the back so they can be cleaned out at the end of the winter. You can also help birds by providing water, and this applies year-round. It's best to use a shallow basin about 2 to 3 feet off the ground. Concrete generally is hard to clean, and it does crack in the winter, so using a different kind of basin is recommended. And these are some other tips for bird baths. You'll find you can attract a lot of birds with water. Those that don't eat seed, you'll still have a lot of diversity of birds that are certainly attracted to the water. And if you have access to electricity, you can provide a heated water dish in the winter if the water freezes. There are certainly lots of other ways you can help, and planting a wildlife-friendly garden is one of the best ways to help lots of species at the same time. By planting native shrubs, trees, and wildflowers, you can help a lot of creatures at once. And I'll show you some good resources on the next slide. Obviously, using little to no pesticides is a very important way to help birds and other important animals like beneficial insects, and obviously do not use any of the chlorinated nicotine pesticides. Try to find non-toxic alternatives for yard and lawn care. Obviously keep cats indoors, and you can also participate in bird monitoring, which helps us to understand bird population numbers. You can do that through eBird, citizen science reporting of birds. You could do it on your own in your backyard or with us in the county parks. And obviously educate as many people as possible on all the different ways they can help. So this is one of the fantastic resources for finding native plants that are wildlife friendly for your yard. It's called jerseyyards.org. It's a plant database that has an incredible amount of resources. You can pretty much find anything you want on there. You can sort, as you can see, by all different parameters, what you want to attract, what kind of soil conditions you have, and so forth. I highly recommend that. Also, you can certify your backyard with National Wildlife Federation. All you have to do is provide food, water, shelter, and so forth in your backyard, and you can certify your backyard that way. So those are all ways you can help. It is clear that birds face a lot of conflicts and problems, especially those related to humans. As climate and habitats change, the birds' strategies must adapt to match the conditions. We can at least do our part to ensure more birds survive by following some of the recommendations detailed here. This concludes the 5-part Birds in Winter series. If you didn't see some of the other parts, you can find them on our Burlington County Parks website, seasonally on our Nature Programs page, and archived on the Virtual Programs page. Thanks so much for watching.